Welcome back, young scholars. I think it is a good choice of you to check this video out. I think it's helpful, so pat on the back for you. Good work. So chapter 25, the rise of industry. So the thing is, what led to the Industrial Revolution? It starts in the early 1800s. It doesn't start after the Civil War. It starts before that. But after the Civil War is when industrialization in the United States really takes off and picks up quite a bit. There are a number of reasons for this. One is that after a war, a lot of stuff is broken, and so it needs to be rebuilt. So there's a lot of opportunity for making new things and rebuilding. New technology is an enormous factor. Railroads are all over the place now. You've got the telegraph, you've got new machinery, a lot of machines are replacing handwork, so there's lots of technology that has a large factor in industrialization in the United States. Another part of it is government policies encourage business to grow. The phrase we studied in class, laissez-faire, means let alone, right? Get out of my face. So the government really let businesses run on their own and didn't interfere very much. So when they weren't letting them alone, though, they actually were encouraging them a lot of times. So we talked about subsidies in class, and what they would do is encourage some businesses, like the railroads, for example, by giving them land or giving them money or giving them tax breaks. So a subsidy helps a business grow, and the government is actually encouraging that business. Also, what helps the rise of industry? The cities are booming. You have millions of immigrants coming into the United States in the late 1800s up to the early 1900s. So there's lots of people to work in factories. So business owners have their pick of people to work in their factories. Along with that, one nice thing is there are many new products which are good for consumers. It's easier for people to get stuff. It's more cheap for people to get stuff. So the rise of these new products in factories is nice for the average citizen, but not everything is good. As we've talked about in class a lot, the working conditions in factories was terrible, and the living conditions, if you were living in a tenement with lots of other families, things were not so nice at home very often. One definition, it's not on the screen, but I meant to tell you, was entrepreneur. That's on your study guide. Entrepreneurs are basically people who start new businesses. They are business owners, people who are willing to take the risk to start a business. That's what an entrepreneur is. Okay, so let's move on. 25.3, increased technology. So one of the things I already mentioned is that machines replace work done by hand. So machinery and technology is replacing a lot of old skilled jobs, like people who used to make clothing by shirts, people who used to make a variety of things are now losing their skilled profession to machinery. Work goes from people's homes to factories. Like I already mentioned, railroads connect the country, and they're making it easier to ship goods. Also, with the telegraph and eventually the telephone, communication around the country is becoming much easier. Becomes the age of steel, and a large part of that is Andrew Carnegie. He was a Scottish immigrant, grew up very poor, but becomes an industrial monster, becomes a very, very wealthy man. Part of the reason he's able to do that is because he goes to England and looks at steel factories there and carefully studies the Bessemer process and brings it back to the United States. And why the Bessemer process matters for us is basically that it's a cheaper way to make steel. So steel becomes cheaper to produce than iron, and steel also has a number of benefits over iron. It's sturdier, it lasts longer, and it's lighter. And Andrew Carnegie realizes this and makes himself very, very successful because of that. He is a great businessman. He always is putting new technology in his factories. He's always got very efficient managers, and he's always willing to spend some money to be ahead of the game in terms of the steel production. One thing we did talk about in class was vertical integration, and that is where you own every step of when you're producing something, you own every single step. So, for example, he owned iron ore fields. He owned coal fields to use in fires to fire up his factories. He owned railroads to ship his iron ore to his factories. So he never paid anybody else. It stayed within his own company. That's called vertical integration. My example in class was with Cub Foods and bananas. How basically Cub Foods is just the middleman. Cub Foods doesn't grow anything. All they are is a storage place where you can go conveniently to buy something. But if you can eliminate that middleman, you save money. And you kick Cub Foods out of the equation, and you're going to save yourself money. So go buy your bananas in South America from Chiquita. One side note about Andrew Carnegie is When he died, he was worth about $475 million, and that's back in 1919, around there, a little bit in the 1900s, so that's not adjusted for today's money. But by the time he dies, he had given all that away except for $30 million. So he had given away about 90% of his wealth to charities, to schools, to hospitals, that sort of thing. So while some of these big business guys had some pretty terrible practices in what they pay their employees, they also do some good things as well. It's electric. Hold on. Let's spice it up. Okay, back to business. So one of those pieces of technology that makes a huge difference is electricity. Thomas Edison opens his invention factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. That name Menlo Park is good if you're ever going to be on Jeopardy. They ask those sorts of questions. Thomas Edison is sort of a science rock star. He's known for creating all sorts of things. The light bulb was a big one. But more importantly, the light bulb does matter, but if you just have a light bulb in a factory, it doesn't matter. What you have to do is you have to be able to set up the electric system. So you need generators, you need power distribution, you need street lights to be able to light up the street. So you need all sorts of things to set up the whole electric system, and that's what Thomas Edison and his company does better than anyone else. They get that started. So like it says on the screen, in 1882, they built the first power station and distribution center in New York City. And we watched that YouTube video in class. Edison is a good inventor. He's a smart man, but probably more than anything else, he's a really good businessman. He was able to find people who were good inventors and buy their patents from them, and then use those himself to make a successful business. So Edison was a very, very good businessman, maybe more so than a straight-up inventor. The telephone. Hold on. I got another one for you. Hold it. Okay. There we are. Little Lady Gaga to spice it up. So, the telephone. 1876. Alexander Graham Bell, who was also a Scottish immigrant. Something about the water in Scotland makes people brilliant at this time period, apparently. He invents the telephone. By 1915, there are over 9 million phones in the United States. So, it's no surprise why telephones are extremely popular and extremely useful. So they take off like hotcakes. New production methods. We watched a video in class. Henry Ford becomes the name that is known with mass production because of his assembly line. There are some really nice things about assembly lines. First of all, every piece is identical, so it makes replacing things so much easier. And I realize I have a typing error in there, but it's supposed to be easier. So if your car breaks down, you can just go to any old parts store, and you know that if you buy your part for the Model T Ford, it is going to fit because they're all identical. Mass production is also nice because it's really easy to train employees. They do the same thing all day long. It doesn't take long to do it, and they get very fast at it. One thing that's nice for some people, or for a number of people, is it employs a lot of people. It gives a lot of jobs. So if you need a job, you can find yourself in a factory without too much training. Mass production is very, very fast, and also becomes cheaper because people are they're good at what they do. You don't need to pay them as much, so the products are cheaper. So that's one nice thing for consumers or the average buyer. One thing I didn't talk about in class, but I think is a good comparison. Think about McDonald's or Subway. This is mass production in today's world at a very clear scale. So people like McDonald's because you know what you're going to get when you go to McDonald's. No matter where you are, if you are in St. Michael, Minnesota, or are you in New Jersey or New York, or you're across the world in China, you know if you go there are going to be Big Macs and hamburgers and the fries. You know what everything tastes like, and you know the menu. Same thing with Subway. That's mass production. It's done the same way. They have a system that's set up, and people like that. It's convenient. It's easy. They know what they're going to get. That's a benefit of why a lot of people like mass production. On the other hand, people a lot of times don't really like working at those jobs because they get repetitive and old and tired, and that's, I think, a similarity between mass production with Henry Ford and mass production today. Air transport. We covered this one quickly in class. Orville and Wilbur Wright, first to fly their plane at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903 for 12 seconds. However, that is a huge feat of man. Being able to fly is something that humankind had wanted to do for a long time and tried, and we watch all those goofy videos of people flopping around in their crazy air contraptions, and the Wright brothers are the first to do it successfully. This has huge implications for our future. Even by World War I, the military is using planes. They do have fighter planes. More than anything, it's probably used for reconnaissance or spying on other people and scouting. But planes, as we all know, are a huge part of our life today. The Postal Service uses planes all the time, and some people, starting early 1920s, are starting to look at traveling with planes. So that was for the very wealthy, but plane travel becomes more and more common as time goes on. Corporations. We spent a fair amount of time in class talking about corporations. A corporation is basically many people own stock in a company. It's not just a few wealthy people who start a business. A corporation sells their stocks to the public, and by selling their stock, they raise money. So people buy small shares of a company, and that raises money for the business to expand and get their company off the ground. The nice thing about it, besides raising money, is that when you sell stock, it kind of spreads out the risk. If the company goes out of business for some reason, if you only have $100 worth of stock, you lose $100. But if you're a partner in a business, you might lose hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions. So it spreads out the risk, which is also nice. A board of directors is in charge of decisions for a company, so they're the one who call the shots. And we'll move on. So we went from corporations to trusts. So what a trust is, it's many businesses or many corporations working together to control prices and supplies. The most famous example from this time period is the Standard Oil Trust by John D. Rockefeller. I note that he gets filthy rich with oil. The pun is intended. Filthy rich oil. Yeah, you got it. So what happens is Standard Oil is a bunch of companies, but they work together to control the price and the supplies of oil. They end up controlling over 90% of the oil supplies in the United States, so they can really charge you what they want to, which is bad for consumers almost all the time. I have on the bottom that it's basically had a monopoly on oil, and that's when one company owns or controls the product. We talked about the evils of trusts. So your book mentions this phrase: it threatens the free enterprise system. With the idea of free enterprise, it's basically that businesses should be able to compete with each other. That when businesses compete, prices are going to be lower, they're going to produce better goods and things that consumers want, and that it encourages them to basically fight each other to give the consumers or the average citizen the best product available. So it's good for people when businesses compete with each other. I gave the example of how the iPhone used to be the only super cool app phone around. Well, now the Droid is there, and that gives a lot of competition to Apple and makes both companies compete with each other to put out the best product. I gave you guys, so I talk about a monopoly and how monopolies are dangerous because they don't need to worry about keeping people happy and can charge you what they want to. In class, I gave you the example of me controlling all the fresh water in the world and how I would charge everybody $100 for a bottle of water, and I would drive around in my Bentley and laugh at people who didn't have water, and I wouldn't feel sorry for anyone, and I'd become ridiculously wealthy. That was my ridiculous extreme example, but is trying to make a point why monopolies can be dangerous. Another concern about monopolies another concern about these people who were in control of these really big monopolies or trusts is that they had so much money that they could basically buy off politicians or government officials. You need money to get elected. And so these very wealthy people could donate all sorts of money and basically bribe politicians to get what they wanted. So that's another reason that monopolies and trust presented a problem at the time period. What's going to happen, this video is running out of time. I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to stop this and make part 2 just so I can finish off with the rest of what I would like to. So click on part 2. I'll put a link in the YouTube. Click on part 2 and the rest of the video will be there.